Welcome everyone to the March 18th Casa de Oro Alliance General Assembly. My name is Lisa Stewart and I'm the co-chair of the Alliance's Government Affairs Committee. And our topic tonight is the San Diego County's socially equitable cannabis program that is in the very, very early stages. In fact, tonight is one of the stakeholder input sessions. So I'd like to introduce the people who are joining us tonight. We have 5 members of the Casa de Oro Alliance Government Affairs Committee. My co-chair, Mike Herron. Michael, wave, there you go. And Alan Arthur. And we've got Ed Batchelder and Roy Davies. Hey. And there you go. And Crystal Grosvenor. There's Crystal. And also joining us tonight is Kathleen Hedberg, who's the president of the Grossmont Mount Helix Improvement Association, GMIA. Hi, Kathleen.
Hello.
And we've got Jim Cousteau, who is the chair of the Spring Valley Community Planning Group, and also Victoria Abrenica, who is a member of the planning group. Hi, Victoria. And we've got Braulio Sanabria, who is with us from the Spring Valley Community Alliance. All right, and I want to give out a shout out to Dustin Bennett, who is Casa de Oro Alliance's media tech guru, without whom tonight's live streamed meeting would not be possible. So thank you, Dustin, from the wings. He's out in the wings. I'd also like to introduce our representatives from the San Diego Sheriff's Department. We've got Lieutenant David Perkins and Sergeant Zahith Sanchez. He's with us tonight. And we welcome Don Chase, the planning manager for the County Department of Planning and Development Services. So before we start, for those who are watching this on Facebook or our website, I want to let you know the format for tonight's meeting because it's a little different from the format of our past assembly meetings. Tonight's meeting is one of the county stakeholder meetings that's part of the county's engagement process to get input from and hear from different communities about the county's socially equitable cannabis program. So tonight's meeting is more of a listening session than a formal presentation with questions and answers. So tonight, the county will be listening to our thoughts and recommendations, including yours. So please use the comments section of Facebook or our website to offer your comments. And you can also email your comments to Don following this meeting in order to give him more detail in your comments and recommendations. So we want you to know that the county is at the very beginning stages of this project. Nothing has been decided yet or put into a plan yet. That's our goal today, is to help give some input for that program. And I also want to say up front that at tonight's meeting, we will not be debating the pros and cons of Prop 64 or whether or not cannabis should be legalized or not. Rather, tonight's focus is to present our recommendations, concerns, and opportunities that can help shape the county's land use policy within this new socially equitable cannabis program. You'll notice that we have Lieutenant Perkins and Sergeant Sanchez from the Sheriff's Department. They are here tonight to listen and to provide some clarification if needed, but they're not here tonight to talk about the illegal dispensaries. If you have concerns about illegal dispensaries, you are welcome to put them in the comments. We will make note of them, but even better, you can send your concerns directly to Supervisor Anderson's office. His website is supervisorjoelanderson.com, and on his homepage, there's a button that you can click to report illegal pot shops. So tonight, Don Chase will go through his slides so that everyone has the overview, and then I will moderate a dialogue where each of the folks here on our screen tonight can share their most important comments and recommendations. And that's when we want to hear from everyone who's watching tonight in the comments section. Okay, so let's get going. I'm going to turn the agenda over to Don Chase.
Thank you, Lisa, so much. I appreciate it. We've been looking forward to this event here for a couple of weeks now, and just wanted to thank the members. And
Don, you took yourself off mute, or you need, Don, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I was having some technical difficulties with my keyboard here. I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time and the opportunity to let us present with you all this evening. And thank you to the Alliance members for having this opportunity. So like Lisa said, I'm here to represent the County of San Diego project team working to develop this new county cannabis program. We'd like to provide a brief overview of the recent board direction from January this year and cover a few key issues and opportunities. But again, the main purpose of this presentation is just to provide some helpful background material. Just real quick, for those of you who maybe not familiar, in 1996, Proposition 215, Notice of Compassionate Use Act, really kind of kicked off cannabis in California. Full 2 decades later, after that, we had Prop 64, known as the Control, Regulate, and Tax Use of Marijuana Act in 2016. And then that was really the start of the legal cannabis market in California. However, in 2017, the County Board of Supervisors banned the expansion of commercial cannabis activities in the unincorporated and enacted a moratorium with a sunset clause for the existing medical cannabis facilities to close down in 5 years. In other words, before April 14th of 2022. And then just this year in January 27th, 2021, the Board of Supervisors directed the county staff to get started on a new socially equitable cannabis ordinance to replace the old code and lift the moratorium. So in short, we're now in the early stages of information gathering, analysis, developing a new draft ordinance. It's our priority right now currently to receive stakeholder input and prepare for a return to the board in June and again in September with additional updates and information for the board to consider. Just a few of our program goals. The direction in January definitely included a focus on outreach and engagement. And the purpose of that outreach is really to, just like Lisa said at the beginning of this conversation, to better understand potential issues and opportunities and receive your inputs early in the process and throughout the process to ensure that the amendments and the ordinance updates are custom and well designed for the unincorporated. We want to be sure that we're providing a full opportunity for all types of stakeholders to engage in the discussion throughout the process. So again, our purpose tonight is really just to be here to listen and answer any questions about the process you might have. Okay, so here's a look at some of the stakeholders that we've actively been engaged with. We have a much larger list on our website. There's about 30 meetings that have already been held with various groups and individuals. Again, we're looking forward to continuing that process, and we'll be continually engaging throughout the ordinance development. Another goal that we have related to that, to the actual ordinance, it is the development of a planning process that looks at all types of cannabis uses to evaluate the compatibility with existing zoning categories such as commercial and industrial and agricultural. We want to look at the component parts of the county regulatory code that governs those types of licenses and ensure consistency with the state law so that there's no redundancies and there's no delays and confusion between the state requirements and the county code. And just to let you know, there may be some interim changes before we do a comprehensive update in order to address that 2022 timeframe for those existing cannabis businesses. So all of that remains to be seen exactly how it will be handled, and we'll be communicating that in our return to the board. Permitting cannabis operations is obviously an important aspect of the project. There's a lot of variables to consider. We're talking about permitting and permitting systems. The board direction included some specific objectives related to organized labor and ingestible cannabis products and on-site consumption, and we're figuring out exactly what those items mean and what they could possibly mean to our ordinance development process. So it really remains to be determined exactly how the zoning code and regulatory code changes will address each of those items. But again, that's why we're here listening tonight and wanting to get your inputs. Enforcement, Lisa highlighted this as a topic. I mean, there's two kind of main categories of enforcement that we're talking about, and as it relates to the zoning ordinance, we have the enforcement related to the illegal side, and then the enforcement related to the compliance of legal cannabis in the terms of the county and state laws. So unlicensed and illegal cannabis cultivation and sales of cannabis involves coordination and partnerships with federal authorities and law enforcement and the district attorney. And really that's on a parallel path, separate from what the work we're doing, working on the ordinance. The county's code compliance division are really the ones that respond from requests to residents to investigate concerns related to ordinance and compliance with existing code and regulations at the county level, and then they elevate that as appropriate to local law enforcement. Just to kind of wrap this up, you know, in terms of the enforcement conversation, we're obviously looking as part of our analysis at local compliance and violation statistics to better understand the existing potential issues related to unique areas throughout the county. So our priorities of future enforcement can definitely be discussed as part of the ordinance development, but by and large, law enforcement will remain largely consistent with the way it is being approached today. Social equity. So a central component to this whole project is social equity. So the board defined the purpose of equity component as providing individuals with past cannabis arrests or convictions, or those that were low income or lived in high risk communities with disproportionately impacted areas with social equity, access, and business opportunities. So in other words, the program needs to include opportunities for those previously disadvantaged communities and individuals. Again, our role is to facilitate an inclusive process and provide policy options and solutions to address these challenges and opportunities, including social equity. So again, it's not clearly defined exactly who qualifies and what the process will be at this point. We're still in the very early stages. Just to wrap up, you know, we have been in communication with a lot of other jurisdictions throughout the state. We have some good ideas on what has worked in those areas and what has been a challenge in terms of environmental review and requirements and permitting processes and land use and zoning restrictions and other limitations. And we'll continue to have those conversations with other jurisdictions and learn from the best practices and present those solutions to the board as appropriate for policymaking. At this point, we can open it up for discussion. Please let me know if we can answer any questions or provide any additional information on anything I presented tonight. I'll turn it over to Lisa to moderate the discussion. And again, thank you for taking time out of your evening and letting us present and discuss this important topic.
There you go. Thank you very much, Dawn. Yep, there we go. Okay, so let's start our dialogue or discussion with comments or recommendations about regulations or zoning or ordinances first. So with our folks who are on the Zoom screen, raise your hand. You can either raise it like this or your icon and let me know so that I know who wants to be called on. So I've got Ed. Anybody else want to chime in? Okay, and also Braulio. Okay, go ahead, Ed, and then I'll call on Braulio next.
Great. Lisa, thank you very much. So some of us that are on the Government Affairs Committee, we basically put together a list of high points that ought to go in a cogent zoning ordinance to comprehensively regulate all the aspects of cannabis that Don just talked about. So not just retail sales, but cultivation, manufacturing, production, distribution, et cetera. So we have a list of 10 points. I won't go into great detail. As Don said, there's a lot of detailed issues with respect to how zoning works. But let me just start quickly with these 10. I'll keep them simple. So one would be, don't just allow cannabis uses in any of the county zones outright. Don't make these entitled uses. They should be subject to a conditional use permit or a special use permit or some other form where you have a much greater degree of discretion and control as a government agency. So number one. Inside that use permit, there should be things like location of the facilities on visibility, lighting, and other types of public safety considerations, adequacy of circulation and parking, customer volume and facility occupancy levels, operating hours, on-site security, spillover effects, noise, odors, lighting, loitering, etc. And then some limit about advertising activities to avoid overexposure. And we've seen quite a bit of that here. The other would be to require 1,000-foot separation between cannabis uses. So let's say in terms of retail sales, storefront outlets, rather than the 600 by the state. So we'd have 1,000 feet from that and 1,000 foot from sensitive receptors that I'll touch next. You can use a door-to-door measurement. We understand there's a lot of nuances about how it gets measured. We realize too that if you use parcel boundaries, some areas of the county have very large parcels. And if you went property boundary to property boundary, if you had 1,000-foot separation on that, it might be unreasonable. The property's 50 acres big. So I think there's some variation, and also the size and the parcels and the urban fabric of the supervisorial districts are different. It's not a one size fits all. So we'd ask you to take a look at that. Pay attention. The other would be 1,000-foot minimum separation between cannabis related uses and sensitive receptors, things like schools, parks, libraries, daycare centers, churches, boys, girls clubs, youth sports fields, etc. And again, lots of issues about how to measure that, and we won't go into that right now. The other would be to establish separation and I would suggest concentration standards for the location of cannabis facilities. And so that's in themselves. So you want to avoid over concentration. Some of those 1,000-foot separations I mentioned before begin to take care of themselves, certainly in urban areas where sensitive receptor land uses are present. However, there may be other cases you need to look at that. The other one would be to make sure to look at over concentration or separation between cannabis uses and existing adult or risk-related uses, nightclubs, bars, lounges, those types of things. So some areas, like for instance, Casa de Oro, we already have a great overconcentration of some of that. So I think this idea of, are we creating these enclaves, you need to watch. The other would be regulate all of it, not just retail sales. We often put a strain on the end of the pipe, but we don't constrain the production side, and you end up with gross oversupply and a huge black market dynamic. This has happened in other states. Oregon is classic for it. So I think you really do need to watch production limits and things on other parts of the cannabis program, not just the retail sales constraint side. The other would be for considering whether you would allow for cannabis deliveries in entirely or at least in part as an adjunct to retail storefronts. So if you have problems citing retail storefronts and the industry feels overly constrained, deliveries reduce a lot of the issues that have concerns about retail storefronts. They just go away with that. San Luis Obispo is a delivery only. Don't know that'll work here in the county, but looking at both aspects, I think is important. The other would be to prohibit on-site consumption or use and cannabis lounges. Let's just not do that. And then outside special events and things, probably look at really placing some limits. We had a few things we've seen here in Casa de Oro that were a little not so good. So that, and then establish regulations, limit the amount of signage and lighting or other advertising that can occur. No sign spinners on the corner. And then the other would be last would be limit outdoor growing to ag areas that are not near residential neighborhoods or other sensitive receptors. Indoor operations, one thing, you can filter it and these other types of things, but outdoors, you should probably just stick in ag or C40 zones or something. So that's just kind of a quick high points of stuff that ought to go in a zoning ordinance. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ed. Braulio had his hand up next, and then Roy.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if we're going to give the county or Don Chase a chance to reply to that, or
Don, do you have any? Yes, nod your head. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if we were giving you time now or are we waiting?
I just wanted to respond to one point that Ed brought up that I think is really important clarification between legal cannabis and illicit cannabis. I completely understand where you're coming from with the oversupply and having too many people growing might mean too much product would fall in and create a public health risk. With legal cannabis operators and legal cannabis retail, all of the product is tracked literally from the time it's planted as a seed and even the seed to who it's sold to, and the ID and the chain of custody along the entire process. And if any business, it's a legal business in cannabis, is not in compliant with that, they'll lose their license and be put into a provisional or some type of corrective situation with the state. So all of that's tracked on what's called a metric system. If anybody is interested in looking it up, it's a blockchain-based system that tracks all the product. So if the product is not reaching its destination, it can't be sold. They literally track the time it takes to move from one location to the other. So I don't want to say it's not an issue. It's definitely a concern, but the oversupply really would be sold to other jurisdictions in the state for legal retail if it wasn't used locally. And that's just kind of, I wanted to make sure that was out there, that clarification was made.
Appreciate that very much, Don. It's just, there's some documentaries before, I think, statewide in California, even in a legal system, there was almost a 10-to-1 imbalance at one point. Production way outstripped the ability to move that much product through the entirety of the legal outlet system in the state.
For sure. And admittedly, this system has only been in place and fully implemented in the last couple of years. So there's surely been cases in the past where that has occurred. But to our knowledge, the new system is now fully in place and required by the state to maintain licenses.
Yeah, and the real downside was just those places came up way short on anticipated revenue, as a result of black market dynamics. Anyway, thank you.
Braulio.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to sort of add a couple of comments and one question to the zoning aspect of this conversation. What I'd like to see, if possible, is a limit to the amount of any cannabis-related industry, whether that be cultivation or processing or distribution, any of those businesses, if we can limit that somehow to the number of adults that we have in a CSA area or in all of Spring Valley. If we have 30,000 adults over 18, then we have one or two businesses that are related in the cannabis industry. That's one comment. The other zoning is I'd really like to see single family homes and apartments, the language really in there to assure the residents that they're not going to have a cannabis dispensary or any other related industry a block from their home. So those are my comments. And as far as my question, I'd like to kind of know if the county has any plans to create an actual business license, a business regulation, and not just for cannabis, but for all businesses in general, so that the sheriff's department and law enforcement and code enforcement can actually do something about the business side of the operations.
Good question. Don, do you want to?
Sure. I'll jump in there. So I completely understand what you're saying about limiting the operation proportional to the size of the community or where it's been cited. And we're definitely hearing some different jurisdictions that have applied some different approaches. There's something for on the retail side that we're learning about, which is sort of like a market ratio of a dispensary per 1,000 residents, per 5,000 residents. We've heard a statistic just today from talking with an industry professional that said, some jurisdictions are going as low as one facility to 5,000 residents. Other jurisdictions have said one facility for 75,000 residents. So there's quite a bit of variation there. And there's also some business decisions for those operators to consider if those types of limitations would work for their business case and business model. So that's something that we can definitely consider. Other jurisdictions have done it, so it wouldn't be the first, and I can relay that suggestion back to our policymakers as part of the dialogue. As far as being protected in single family homes and apartments, completely understand the concerns there. In the business relations, and maybe I could let Lieutenant Perkins kind of speak to that from a law enforcement side.
As far as I'm sorry, Mr. Sanabria, are you talking about, they're gonna create are they gonna have to get a normal business license, or they're gonna create some kind of new business license? You're muted.
My understanding, as far as what the county regulations are for businesses in general, if I wanted to go out and sell socks on the street,
Right.
I'm not necessarily going to be in any kind of legal trouble. And the sheriff's department can't tell me to move off the street because I have the right to do that. You know, so how is it that we have businesses, illegal businesses, that say they have the right to sell marijuana or cannabis?
Well, I can tell you, it's just like any other business. Obviously the illegal dispensaries don't have valid business licenses, and once we get the ordinances in place, the new dispensaries that are legal will have the proper licensing. But just like we can now, I won't use marijuana as, but just example, a restaurant that doesn't have a business license or a food license, we can absolutely cite for that. And then that's where we work hand in hand with code enforcement. And if there's anyone from code enforcement on, they could probably answer that better, but we definitely will have the leverage there's codes already in place that we can go after, along with other new laws that, that are written.
So I guess my question, from a sheriff's standpoint, is there a law that could help you regulate these businesses better? That as an organization, as a community member, can we advocate for?
Yeah, I can tell you there's already a lot of laws in the books right now that we currently use, both in the health and safety code, the penal code, and as well as county ordinances. And we currently do use them, and we currently work hand in hand with code enforcement when we shut down these illegal dispensaries. Once we get the new laws written for the legal dispensaries, we'll have even better leverage, because we'll be able to focus more on the dispensaries that are not, following the provisions.
Yeah, and I think that's part of our concern is as community members is we already have laws that are supposedly being used to shut down dispensaries, but we still have dispensaries. So if we have illegal dispensaries, will that somehow wave a magic wand and all of the illegal ones go away?
That's to be seen, but you're absolutely right. And I can tell you, the sheriff's department prioritizes shutting these places down, and the board of supervisors is also helping out the sheriff's department with funds for enforcement on these places. And I know it seems like, because there's a lot of them, that they're all over the place, but I can tell you, just in the sheriff's department, we've just in the Spring Valley area, we've shut down almost half of the dispensaries that were opened up in just the last year. So we definitely have been busy. It takes a lot of resources, but we definitely are still focusing on shutting them down. And there's definitely many less facilities than there were a year ago.
So well noted that Braulio, and I think all of our concerns and everyone out in the community who's watching this, we want to make sure that this is addressed this topic is definitely addressed in the cannabis program that is implemented. So for sure, duly noted. And I'm going to put a plea out to everybody who's watching to go do some research and find out what some other communities are doing, and share those examples with the county. Because we can all do our part to help find some of the solutions that have been successful in other communities. It doesn't even have to be West Coast. It could be a whole nother state. So anyway, I put that challenge out there. Roy, you had your hand up, but I noticed, Connor, you took yourself off mute a couple of times. Do you want to chime in?
Just really quick, thank you, Lisa. Wanted to add in just to clarify part of our interactions with the sheriff department. So I work for code compliance and represent PDS code compliance. Essentially, we're coming at this from two different sides. The sheriff is covering the criminal end of this. We're covering what I'm going to call the civil end, or the zoning ordinance, the building code, those sorts of things. As a part of this, we've been directed by the board to continue our efforts with the sheriff and increase our efforts with the sheriff to not only collaborate from a law enforcement standpoint, but also change some of the existing rules and regulations that we have in place as it applies to these sorts of zoning ordinance or land use issues. Specifically, just to put a fine point on it, some of the things we're looking at, as I know I've had some of these conversations with folks on the line tonight, we want to speed up our hearings process. We want to speed up the process of getting to the point where we've exhausted all of the appeal rights that dispensaries and anyone else that's in a zoning or land use situation. So we're really looking at updating all of our ordinances to increase our enforcement ability on the civil side, and certainly continuing to work in lockstep with the sheriff to have their support from law enforcement. So thank you.
Roy, and then Jim.
Hi, thanks. This is Roy. So a couple things on the illegal dispensaries. I would just encourage that whatever comes up with this ordinance, of course, has to have some meat to it to shut down the illegal. One of my concerns would be if there's not, there will be illegal dispensaries operating while legal dispensaries are going through the permitting process and doing this legally. And those illegal dispensaries are not going to go away until something really happens on the ground. I could easily see these things all operating in parallel until the county really gets their handle around shutting this stuff down. That's all I'll say about that. From the zoning point of view, if there is a 1,000-foot buffer to any residential properties, and speaking for someone with an eye towards Campo Road and Casa de Oro, there would be no marijuana dispensaries on Campo Road if there is a 1,000-foot buffer to residential. So perhaps that's a good thing, I don't know. But there is a manufacturing zone where Deering Banjo is, and there's sort of this outlier. They're all on their own out there. So that could become a cultivation or manufacturing facility, at least according to the draft ordinance that I read through from the county. These are high profit businesses, and it's not unexpected that they will make a huge retail offer for that property to the Deerings, and who knows what's going to happen. I think it's just something that we have to be conscious of as we specifically tailor this zoning ordinance to Casa de Oro. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. Any comments back for Roy from the county? Okay, I'm going to have Jim speak.
Hi. When you look at the way the zoning lays out in Spring Valley, including Casa de Oro, I mean, it's a hodgepodge. For many, many years, Spring Valley has suffered from zoning that never was done with any logic or intellect involved. It just sort of happened. And historically, that's been the case. So that's going to be a major challenge. It would be, I think it would be really good to have an expert legal person involved with our group who could really tell us what the potential laws or ordinances, how they could be written in such a way that the moment an illegal dispensary opens up, you could, law enforcement could go in, or zoning code enforcement could go in, recognize there's not the requisite permits to operate that facility, and immediately shut it down, confiscate all product and all cash. I mean, going through these appeal processes, that it's kind of like, I was involved with, I taught automotives for many, many years, and we have illegal smog shops that do illegal smogs that are rampant. And it takes the Bureau of Automotive Repair a significant length of time to do the investigation and eventually shut down the shop, take away the license of the individual doing the illegal smogs. But they make so much money in the process of doing these illegal smogs that they don't care if they lose a smog machine or one of the cousins loses his or her license, it's in their business plan that they know it's going to take a year, 2 years, 6 months, whatever, to shut down the operation. They make so much money that there's no disincentive to doing it. I'm curious as to what we can do legally to make it possible to immediately shut down illegal dispensaries.
Yeah, Jim, thank you for sharing that. And Ed, I know that you have your hand up, but I'm also watching the clock. And I think this is a good segue into talking about enforcement, because that's the other category, one of the other categories in the cannabis program. So Crystal, do you want to start us off there with talking about enforcement?
Sure. I'm going to switch my points around since everybody wants to talk about the illegal dispensaries. First of all, I have 2 points to make about enforcement, 2 general points. First of all, if we legalize cannabis in unincorporated areas and we still have illegal dispensaries, then we have failed our communities. The money that we generate from this legalization really needs to be able to support the enforcement that is required to keep our communities safe and keep this away from children as well, from children and youth in the communities. So Dawn, I want to thank you for kind of explaining a little bit about the illegal dispensaries. One thing is that we need it to be so painful for illegal dispensaries to be running their businesses. I've emailed the county sheriff, and I know that it takes a lot of money and it takes a lot of effort to be able to shut them down, and then they reopen the next day. There's not enough teeth in the current legislation, policies, ordinances. There's just not enough there to properly support the rule that we will not allow illegal sales of marijuana. So we need there to be so much within the policies, within the code that make it so that there's no way that they can fall through the nets. We can't have illegal dispensaries and legal dispensaries next door to each other because the legal ones will not survive. We need a procedure for landlords to become notified by the county and have a limited amount of time to take action and evict their tenants. The landlord issue and the tenant protection laws make it impossible for enforcement to take place. It makes it impossible for the sheriff to do their job. And so the landlords need to be held accountable. There needs to be a lot of everything in there for the landlords to be able to take accountability and take action. Let's see. I think that covers everything for the illegal dispensaries. The other request is that we would like for enforcement, we would like to designate or have you designate a department of inspection and code enforcement. And this might very well be a part of what Connor, what your department does. But similar to ABC, like how you have decoy employees that go in and ensure compliance and that they're not selling to you, things like that. We need a department that's really strong. They're not spread thin, and they're able to go in and ensure that everything is up to the code that you write. And that's all I have for enforcement.
Yeah, that there could be some money that from that goes to fund the enforcement of it. Don, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify on one point, one key important point is youth access. And that's a real scary thing because right now we have unlicensed shops and we don't know if they're checking IDs or not. We have unlicensed delivery and we don't know if they're checking ID or not. On the legal side, we do know that everyone entering the building shows their ID as soon as they walk in and also has to show their ID on the way out. So there's a 2-point inspection process, and all of the legal delivery services also request and have an ID verification, both when they sign up to place their order online with the legal delivery service And at the time of sale, when that product is provided, the ID is also verified. So just wanted to make sure and let you know that that's all part of the tracking system that the state has put in place to make sure that every bit of cannabis is tracked from seed into sale and know where that cannabis ended up. So again, that's a great reason why the legal alternative is a much better situation from a public health standpoint for youth access, and definitely willing to work with you all on the enforcement challenges. I know Connor spoke to the issues, the lieutenant spoke to these issues. We don't want to dominate tonight's conversation with the enforcement. We really want to try to focus the input on hearing what you think are the best policy solutions and options for the ordinance and what's right for your community.
I did want to give a shout out to some folks who have put things in the chat. Kathy Simmons and Cindy Hunt Vanderberg and Terry Becker, John Putman. I wanted to just acknowledge Sean Lucas. I wanted to acknowledge that we do hear you and we read what your comments are. They're shared with everybody on this panel, so everybody sees that. And I just wanted to validate that. Thank you for giving your comments, that we see them. Let's see, Lieutenant Perkins.
I know this is not an enforcement meeting. I just wanted to clarify just a couple of things. Like I said before, I understand the frustrations with the perception that, you know, there's a lot of which there are, but I can tell you, like I said before, the Sheriff's Department and the County Board of Supervisors put a lot of resources towards the illegal dispensaries. And just this past year, we've shut down over half of them in the Spring Valley area. Just in the last month, we've shut down on average one a week. Specifically to answer the question, which I understand the frustration about, we shut one down and then the next day they open. We're doing our best to address that with using resources. I'll give you an example. We had one recently where we shut it down and we served a search warrant. These investigations take a lot of time, undercover work, and they take a lot of resources. And we shut down one, it opened up the next day. So we shut it down again, and we brought in the fire marshal, we brought in code enforcement, and we were able to find out that there was some illegal wiring and stuff like that. And it gave us the ability to shut off the power with SDG&E. So they weren't even able to run electricity in this building anymore. So we're trying to think outside the box to prevent that. Now that, unfortunately, that doesn't stop somebody from finding a new location, but we certainly are working hand in hand with code enforcement, the fire marshal, power company, et cetera, to find long-term solutions so they can't just open back up the next day. So I just wanted to clarify that for everyone. Thank
you, Lieutenant. And we appreciate all the work that you guys do to get them shut down and re-shut down. For the county, I want you guys to not have to think outside the box. It should be simple to close them, shut them down, make it painful for them to run their businesses and make money off of and taking advantage of our communities. And we want to support you so that you don't have to do that. You shouldn't have to shut someone down because of wiring. But I mean, it's so appreciated. We really appreciate all of the work that you guys are doing to do that. And it would be great if you didn't have to.
Appreciate that.
So Braulio.
Hi, I'm not sure if you wanted to keep going on enforcement. I know Donna wants to move on from this enforcement talk and really go on to policy. And this is probably a more of a zoning thing again, but I think it's important. Or is it maybe it's a tax part? I'm not sure, but I want to see some of the sales of legal cannabis in the county coming back to the underprivileged areas of Spring Valley specifically, creating better schools, better parks, and then really having grants for unrelated businesses that have been affected that are not related to cannabis. You know, here we are trying to, you know, give money to the people who have had infractions in the past, and I think that's a good idea in some ways. But there are a lot of people who have been affected by the war on drugs because their parents were involved with marijuana or with cannabis sales, and they want nothing to do with it, but they're still affected. So I want to see grants going to, in general, people of color, underprivileged neighborhoods for unrelated cannabis businesses.
Okay, I know that Michael has his hand up, and I'm also watching our time. Can we move over to permitting and social equity, which Braulio kind of touched on? Or Michael, are you still on the enforcement? Do you have something?
No, I kind of have something on that particular topic itself.
On enforcement?
No, on the social equity, kind of following up with what Braulio was saying.
Cool.
I think there's so just to think outside the box potentially. I know that there's a lot of players that want to make a lot of profits in this, but I'd like to try and figure out a way for the policy to support more of these resources staying within the community, where we have what if there was a nonprofit organization, a public benefit nonprofit organization that wanted to make profit, so to speak, off of marijuana and reinvest that into the community rather than into the cannabis industry, so to speak. Could there be ways for nonprofit organizations to participate in this, so that the money that's brought to bear can actually be kept inside the community rather than exported out to other parts of the state or other parts of the country? I think that's kind of where I'm thinking, is where we can keep, because I understand the whole, and maybe you can talk more about the social equity component of this, but I'm thinking not only is that we need to give people chances, but we need to try and keep the resources within our community as best we can.
Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, I can tell you the social equity conversation, it oftentimes kind of goes straight to retail licenses and giving people a license to sell cannabis. When really if you think of it, it's much more like a pizza or a pie, right? And that's one slice of it. There's like Brilio mentioned, there's lots of different pathways for folks and lots of different programs that could be set up. In the state, there's been programs tried in LA and programs tried in Oakland. Oakland is often pointed to a model of success. And it's really more of an opportunity for you all to weigh in on this aspect of it. Is do you want to promote cannabis education? San Diego State is working on programs. San Marcos is working on programs. The UCs have their medical research into cannabinoids. So there's a pathway for equity participants to enter into education, which then could lead to small business growth and entrepreneurship and giving back and keeping those dollars locally. There's also the broader conversation about the economic benefits of small local cannabis businesses versus out of town, corporate, out of state, international investment coming in and those dollars flowing out. So that's something for you all to consider. And we'd love to hear your inputs and thoughts on that conversation as well as it relates to equity and economics.
Okay, Michael, then Victoria, then Crystal.
Oh,
you're
out.
Okay.
I'll get out. I'll lower my hand.
Okay, Victoria and then Crystal.
Okay, my thoughts are on social equity. So how does the board plan to prioritize social equity, access, and business opportunities? How will they prioritize people of color? And if they limit the amount of cannabis dispensaries in our area, will they put our current cannabis business owners on a priority list? Will they walk current cannabis owners, our business owners through the process? And if the current law is extremely costly and isn't enough to deter unlicensed cannabis businesses from selling, will the county offer incentives or tax write-offs for these businesses to apply for legal licenses? Will they protect current cannabis business owners who plan to become legal cannabis businesses? What is the county doing to prevent legalization of cannabis businesses from causing further gentrification in our area?
That was a lot.
A lot of really good questions there, and I think what you just laid out is the policy challenge that we have. I mean, those are the key issues that we're working with here. So as far as prioritization of equity, it's in the title. I mean, this is central component to figure out how to engage disproportionately impacted populations, minority populations, veterans, disabled, anyone that is potentially been affected by the war on drugs, and try to prioritize opportunities for them to get on the ladder and build businesses, maybe not cannabis businesses, but just to have some equity benefit coming to a broad base of people. The county has gone so far as to establish an Office of Equity and Racial Justice, which is specifically designed for this purpose, and they will be leading our equity program development as it relates to this effort. So I know Andrew Strong personally. He's a great guy. He's very familiar with the county enterprise and is extremely passionate about what he does. And I'm so excited to have him on board and to see this genesis of this program take place. So lots more conversations to come on equity. As far as current business owners go, yeah, that's going to be a challenging conversation, and where to draw the line with remediation and corrective actions versus giving back to the community and trying to find a legal pathway to do maybe what they're good at. So there could be equity incentives for cultivation rather than just retail. There's lots of different program options that have been tried in the state. So those incentives for participation and bringing in equity participants into the fold, those are key objectives stated by the board's direction, and they're key policy priorities for staff as far as our research and analysis and providing those policy options to the board. So we hear you, and we're excited about the possibilities too.
Thank you. Crystal.
That was my first point under permitting and social equity. I have 4. The first was, are you working with the Office of Equity and Racial Justice? So that's one great way to see that it's not just in the title, that the county is actually actively working towards serving underprivileged areas and communities affected by the war on drugs and beyond. I'm excited to hear you respond with that. My second one is to ensure that you're giving permits to local residents, not outside companies, to take advantage of the new market when we need these jobs here. My third is to consider offer training and business startup support for new and promising entrepreneurs to be considered. And my last is to we need to see on paper that revenue generated is kept for education, youth prevention, and other social problems. I saw a really great comment by John Putnam from Facebook. I believe revenues need to go back to drug treatment program for youth, especially. So prevention and support for that. We have a lot of communities in unincorporated San Diego that is already badly affected by drugs and homelessness. And if this ordinance is done right, we will not just protect our communities, but these specific communities will benefit from the decision to allow cannabis sales in unincorporated counties. Thank you.
Roy had his hand up.
Thank you. And I'm not sure how long my hand stays up there, so I keep missing.
There you go.
Responding to Mike's comment about reinvestment back into the community where these businesses will be located. Keep in mind that most of these ordinances in the county that are already developed for the cities like La Mesa right next door to us do not have a 1,000 buffer to residential. And if we do hang on to that, it does mean most likely there would be no dispensaries on Campo Road. Therefore, there would be no taxes reaped to reinvest in our community. So these are some of the matrix that you have to think about. It's what's more important to have a legal dispensary and get some revenue back into the community or not, because you can't have both. So these are further discussions. Thank you.
I just add that there's probably a definition about how big of a footprint a community is. I mean, I think about the Valley de Oro Planning Group area, and I'm sure that the Spring Valley Planning Group area thinks about that geography as well. It's like how many dispensaries do we need in our planning group areas? Kind of my question. And I saw that that previous ordinance that they had put together, and it was 1,000, and they were saying that there'd be like one in all of Valley de Oro planning group, and maybe one in Spring Valley. I don't know whether or not having just one outlet in all of this one geographic space is appropriate or not, but I mean, it's a community discussion. And I think that's kind of what, from a policy perspective, we really need to keep our eye on, is making sure that we don't lose community input into the process. Like how much of a voice can we have as a community on a go forward basis if we have our community planning group engaged? How can we engage our community planning group about how we want to have marijuana or cannabis in our area, and how do we make sure that the planning group has some teeth to be able to have a say in that?
Yeah, very, very good point. I'm looking at our clock. It's 7:05. We did start a little late, so I'm not going to shut us off right now. But that raises a really good question about further input. And I think the Casa de Oro Alliance, and I think the Spring Valley Community Association and planning groups and all of our organizations, GMIA, there's lots of opportunities for us to have continued dialogue about this as we move along. So thank you for bringing that up. There was a question in the chat from Thomas Gibaldi about what are considered acceptable cannabis-related conviction arrests to be overlooked during the permitting process for facility ownership. And I had at least two of my friends before this call said, please ask about that. Like, whoa, this program won't be rewarding illegally operating dispensaries and putting them to the front of the line, will they? Or, so I don't know if you had any clarification, Don, about that, because that is a concern about social equity and what that means.
Sure, I hear you. I mean, you probably don't want career criminals, selling drugs legally to your friends and neighbors. There's an obvious concern there and an obvious risk. Especially when you go further up the chain, it's a cash business, and where does the money come from? Where does it go? All of those implications for organized crime and illicit activities. And I'm no expert on that any more than anyone else that watches crime shows on TV. That stuff is out there, I'm sure. But we'll leave it to Lieutenant Perkins to speak more to it. As far as participation in an equity program goes, I'm thinking it's more along the lines of things that would be classified as a misdemeanor these days, or maybe a conviction that wasn't involved with some type of violent interaction or some type of felony. I know the state has gone over the years and reviewed past criminal records and has expunged various convictions, and maybe those are the folks that would be at the front of the line that have already had a state record cleared by the state criminal justice system, changing the convictions and clearing up the records. Those are probably the types of folks that would be, definitely a voice in the process and would be reached out to and engaged. And I can tell you that I've had conversations with some of those folks. I've had conversations with some people that are actively participating in the gray market of cannabis cultivation who would love to come to the full legal retail side. Those folks are reaching out and asking what they can do to participate. So I think it really is going to span a whole spectrum of folks. I think anybody that wants to participate in the legal market, and the conversation about the policymaking is going to be welcomed by the Office of Equity and Racial Justice and by our team to at least participate in the process and express their views. And we'll leave it to the policymakers to really kind of set the parameters of be the gatekeepers, so to speak, into the program. I know the state probably does have some requirements for background checks and investigations. And I know when they apply to retail licenses in other jurisdictions, a lot of questions on the application about where the funds are coming from, who's invested in this, and where's the money coming from to start this business? And those questions are all key questions in the application process that for many jurisdictions at both the local applications and at the state level. So I'm sure we'll eventually have something similar to that in our application process as well. So hope that answers some of the questions. I hear you. It's a concern. It's a concern I have as well. And I think it's something that we can work through together.
Okay, fantastic.
If I could just
Roy.
say that I've been involved with some of these legal dispensaries in some of the other cities, and the amount of paperwork to get through a conditional use permit includes listing your potential staff members and providing an FBI life scan of your history. So in terms of some of the comments in the chat room right now, I think we can all rest pretty assured that the people that are operating these dispensaries or manufacturing or cultivation have passed a pretty high bar with the FBI in order to get these licenses.
Okay, so I'm watching our clock and I'm going to wrap up our dialogue in about 3 minutes. So Ed, I see your hand raised.
Thanks, Lisa.
You're welcome.
Now I was just going to say that's a really important point. And basically, the other thing would be when we look at all of the the revenue side, Don, we have all these expectations about big revenue, but again, when you look at the balance of costs, so I don't know how you guys might spread this around. There's usually a lot of pressure and enforcement costs, as Roy just said, placed on the retail end of the pipeline, use permits, reviewing all your staff and all of that. And it tends, again, drives up the price, creates these issues that other communities have seen about trying to get legal cannabis priced where it's just not in constant competition with the black or gray markets. What's been the experience, or what's your guys' thoughts about, can you move those, like some of those costs around in the industry, like put more of it on cultivation and production where the ability to shoulder fees might actually be a little more palatable than just on the one at the end of the pipeline?
Sure. Yeah, there's plenty of different tax regimes out there, right? And different fees, and our particular jurisdiction, the County of San Diego, has a full cost recovery program for a permit application. So they're coming in, unless the board does something different with their policies, we're expecting to be made whole in terms of the staff time to review the application and set up the conditional use permit. So that's one aspect of it. But cultivation is, it's from the conversations that we've had with cultivators, it is not cheap to get into that either. A minimum space to be competitive with the indoor market and sell to the licensed retailers as a licensed cultivator, we're hearing is upwards of 10,000 square feet at $1 million investment to get a cultivation facility up and running. So that's a problem for equity stakeholders and small businesses right there. And then to squeeze them more with taxes, that's a challenge too. And then, like you hit on, there's a trade-off of where you set the tax. La Mesa's tax is different than the city of San Diego's, and there's a real market share battle between where the customer is going to drive to based on saving 3 to 5% on their product that they're purchasing. And that's something the county is going to have to take into account. And like you also pointed out, that's a competition with the illicit trade as well. So the taxing conversation and the economics and the supply and demand dynamics is something we could use all the expert help we can get. If it's something that you're passionate about and you can help us contribute and find examples that work, we're definitely all ears in that perspective.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And the other point is you're right, market competition, you are woven along the edge of a whole bunch of jurisdictions with variable schemes.
Yep.
And the unincorporated friends can be interesting. So, all right, thank you.
Okay, quickly, Victoria and Roy.
Regarding equity, will the county be including people of color from the communities that are being affected in the conversations? Because I've seen other equity teams form in other areas of the county, and people of color weren't included in those conversations or boards.
Sure. So there's a couple of organizations that have been formed recently. There's a cannabis stakeholder group that's kind of taken shape that is comprised of a lot of equity stakeholder groups, NGOs, community leaders, and nonprofit organizations that speak for people of color, represents people of color, either from the religious side or from community groups and community associations. I don't have all those members now, but that group is just recently taking shape. And like I said, the Office of Equity and Racial Justice will be leading the equity program development. And I can tell you now that Andrew will be lightning zeroed in on being focused on having people of color at the table in the decision making and the prioritization and the conversation. And I'm just excited to see where it goes and excited to be a part of it. But I can assure you that that's definitely a top priority for our staff and our leadership.
Thank you. And Roy. Oh, Roy, you're muted. Yeah.
Whoops, Daisy. Here we go. A question for Don. You guys have obviously done a lot of work looking at the other legal ordinances in the other cities like La Mesa. Do you guys have any stats on the amount of still operating illegal dispensaries versus the number of legal dispensaries in those jurisdictions? Did the implementation of legal dispensaries in some way shut down the illegal businesses?
It's such a fascinating question, and I'm personally really curious about the answer to that question, because it really all hinges on that trade-off, right? Is creating a pathway to legal cannabis cultivation and retail going to drive out illicit operations and illicit criminal activities associated with those operations and businesses? It's a challenge, and the law enforcement conversation is clear, but as far as the research goes, there's a lot of statistics and a lot of data out there from many different sources, from the legal cannabis industry groups and retailers that work up and down the state that have data, and then also the universities. The universities are very interested in tracking the market dynamics and getting into these discussions. Again, I would be completely open to any conversations that anyone wants to have about the market dynamics and the economics of this, to come up with an approach and a methodology to really dive into the details here. It will be in a collaboration with our finance and general government group and the folks that are going to help evaluate the tax rates. I can tell you they're bringing on a special tax consultant just for that purpose, to help them start to formulate that dialogue. But we're still very early in the stages of that conversation. You're absolutely right. There's a huge trade-off, and there's a very microeconomic and macroeconomic context that we need to explore to make informed policy decisions.
Thank you.
All right, we have come to the end of our time limit, and I'm going to just put one thing out there about consumption lounges and event permits. Ed touched on it briefly under enforcement and zoning. And my suggestion or recommendation is that maybe the program, the county's program, comes along in phases, and that consumption lounges and event permits is like phase 6 towards the end, when you've had an opportunity to evaluate the progress and work out the bugs and anyway, that's just my recommendation, is that maybe build in some sort of a phased implementation of the program. Okay, so thank you everyone for participating, and thank you everyone for watching this. I hope you learned some things. We took copious notes of all of the chats, the comments that people put in chat. So know that your questions and your comments and concerns have definitely been noted. They might not have been publicly called out tonight, but we did capture them. And thank you for your participation and your questions and concerns. And also opportunities. Some people shared some opportunities too, so we're grateful for that. I'm going to end our meeting because this is the Casa de Oro Alliance's General Assembly. At the end of our assembly, we always have a couple of slides that we encourage people to get involved. So Dustin, I'm going to ask you to share the first slide. And hopefully he can do that. So the first slide is your thoughts and comments matter. And I've got the information, Don Chase's contact information and how you can sign up for project updates. So if you want to be updated every time the website is updated, here, okay, oh, I'm seeing it, okay. There's the slides they're showing. So your comments matter. Please, please, please send Don your information. His email is donald.chase@sdcounty.ca.gov on the slide. Also sign up for project updates. And I created a tiny URL, a shortened URL that you can click on, and that goes directly to the county's website, or you can just Google socially equitable cannabis program, County of San Diego, and it'll put you right on that page. And there's a place where you can click to receive emails every time there's an update. And then also Supervisor Joel Anderson is our new supervisor. So let him know how you feel about this issue and about illegal dispensaries. Okay, my next slide has to do with an announcement from our Casa de Oro Alliance Beautification Committee. They want you to join the Kenwood Freeway Ramps cleanup team. So they've worked with Caltrans and they are able to adopt the exit and entrance ramps on Kenwood Drive. And if you are interested, contact Rachel on our Facebook page and let her know that you are interested in being trained. There's a training and that you want to help keep that freeway on-ramp and off-ramp clean. Also, join a committee. That's the best way to get involved. We have on the Casa de Oro Alliance, we have several committees. We have the Beautification and Community Events Committee, the Economic Development and Fundraising Committee, Government Affairs, and Public Information and Outreach. So if any of those sound somewhat interesting, you can send an email to cdoamedia@gmail.com and say, hey, I want somebody from one of those committees to get in touch with me. And last but not least, we hold our general assemblies every odd month on the third Thursday. So our next General Assembly is May the 20th at 6 p.m. Save the date. Our featured speaker is Mr. Omar Passions, and he's going to be talking about homelessness and solutions. So mark your calendar, and thank you, folks that are on this Zoom call for participating, and thank you everybody for listening tonight and giving your input. We'll see you in the next time. And thank you to the county and the Sheriff's Department. We appreciate you guys for being here. All right. Good night. Have a great evening.